So I'm got a wonderful group of people here to talk about what I think is one of the new exciting topics that everybody is abuzz about. So to my right, I have Shawn Kingsberry, and he is the CIO of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. He's widely known for, speak up, he's widely known for being a leader in the cloud space in the federal government, really pushed that. He also, I call it the transparency movement. I'm not alone, but I think you've been a big part of finding ways to push information out to the public, which fits. Pull it up. Sorry, should I just, here we go, like that. I'll be a super secret agent spy. So he's been a real leader in the transparency movement, fits in perfectly with the emergence of big data. And then he's got some really interesting things using big data as an innovation at the Recovery Board that I will bring up with him. To my left, I have John Messina, and hold on, I have to somehow do this and see my cheat cards. We have John Messina, who's the co-chair of the Cloud Computing NIST Reference Architecture and Taxonomy Public Working Group. You get the longest title by far, yes. But John brings a wonderful background of science and technology to his role at NIST. He's now working on looking at the interoperability of the cloud. I think that makes also great sense as we talk about big data. And then, last but not least, we have Tseronis, who is the CTO of the Department of Energy. I at least think of the Department of Energy, it stands out for me as one of those agencies that consistently looks at technology as a way to moving forward. So it seems like it would be a great place to be the CTO. And I know that you've been looking a lot lately at how to turn your data into an asset and how you can actually use big data assets and hopefully achieve this data-driven government that we've been speaking about. So, we've got a great panel. I've got some questions. It's a small group. I heard in the last thing people are asking questions, so I'll make sure we leave time. But at any given point, please make it interactive. Raise your hand, throw out a question, whatever you want to do. So please feel free to open it up. So I thought that we'd start the day with asking folks to talk a little bit about some of the things that are very pertinent, and in their job with their mission. And I guess I'll start with you, Shawn, to my right. But you have been talking a lot about this, big data, cloud. How do you get these things going in the government? So I was wondering if you could give us some thoughts on, lessons you learned from pushing these new technology agendas into the government that traditionally doesn't move at that pace that maybe we all like, but it seems like you've achieved that pace. So give us some thoughts.
Okay, well, first off, hello. That's that wake-up call, right? A couple of things. We actually are in a unique situation where we could actually hit pause and actually reach out to the rest of the great things that the federal government has been doing. So to marry up with the experiences that we've had since 2009. So I'm going to step backwards to step forward, right? So we recently wrote a white paper, and it'll be released pretty soon. And what we did is we actually interviewed 30 industry and federal agency leads that are doing some interesting things in the advanced analytics and cloud space and what have you. And with that, we married that up with the lessons learned that we've had from a transparency perspective. And look at recovery.gov. I mean, that was a different requirement from a federal agency to actually do recipient level reporting, collect this from all 150,000 recipients across the country, and roll it up and be able to, from a visualization perspective, be able to actually show what that means and make it transparent so the citizens could actually ask questions of the data. And transparency drives accountability, right? So in essence, when errors were found, that was good for us. We're like, great. So then you put that energy back in to begin to clean things up and represent it. So now, in parallel with that, we have the accountability side, right, where we have to do the fraud, waste, and abuse of the $840 billion of stimulus funds, right? And with that, you don't hear a lot about what that means, but in essence, on that side of the house, we're actually reaching out to roughly 27 plus data sources, consolidating that information, creating risk models, and doing some interesting things when you look at in-memory computing to be able to quickly run millions of records against hundreds of millions of rows and retrieve it in less than 10 minutes, right? So it's really interesting. So now when you look at the interviews that we did in the white paper, when we had to move to the next level, when you look at the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2012, that gave us the right to actually look at the lessons learned from the recovery initiative and see how that could be implemented across the federal government, right? So what we did is we stood up our own on-prem cloud hub infrastructure, leveraging the consolidation of lessons learned and the risk and issues when people raise information assurance types of issues and what have you. What we did is we built our cloud hub stack based on all of the issues that everyone raised, right? So in essence, and we mitigated all of them from an on-prem perspective. But what that did now, it gave us the opportunity to say, okay, now let's go ahead and make some interesting migrations where we migrated mail and collaboration to Microsoft 365, their first GovCloud customer, and infrastructure over to Amazon. Now you have to think of what that means in parallel with delivering federalaccountability.gov as a service to external agencies. So you look at the segmentation of access controls between a variety of systems and dealing with big data, right, on-prem, with meeting law enforcement types of requirements in parallel with data as a service that the public actually receives and what have you. So we've learned a lot, but what we're trying to do is share as much of this as possible. So you are going to see a lot of that in the white paper and a couple of other things that we're working right now that we're just taking on.
So you've just had a peaceful time.
Yes.
Basically,
yes.
just relaxed and
Life is good.
Life is good. Yes.
Yes.
No. Sounds like you've accomplished a lot. So congrats
Fun
on
stuff.
that. That's good. So I think that leads nicely into a bit of a conversation about standards and interoperability. You've done a lot. Like you said, you've brought some stuff on premise. You've put some stuff out into a cloud outside of your organization. So do you have some thoughts on that and some, give some people some maybe input on where NIST is looking in these areas and things for them to think about as they consider this?
I'd be happy to. For those that aren't familiar, NIST was tasked with helping to speed the successful adoption of cloud computing for the United States government. We've done a number of things you're probably familiar with. We have a definition of cloud computing. We've had public working groups where we've invited all the expertise from academia, industry, government into our public working groups to really better understand what cloud computing is so that we can all take advantage of it. We've been moving along nicely in that regard. Big data is, a lot of people have started talking about how it is the killer application for cloud computing. I think that's a bit strong, but it's certainly well fit to cloud computing. The idea that we have all this unstructured or semi-structured data out there, and we want to be able to look through it and find useful information to help drive our business information decisions. But that's not necessarily easy. Using traditional data analytics methods, it can be very hard to pull out that useful information. So big data has all of these new ways of looking at the data, which fit nicely with cloud computing. You might have a high reliance on parallel processing. You need to deal with issues such as data locality. Nobody wants to be moving petabytes of data around the internet if you can help it. You need to access the information for where it is and maybe move the analytics around. You have costs associated with it. Traditionally, if you were going to do big data in the past, you would need your own cluster, which would be a huge upfront cost to a given organization or agency. Now that we have cloud computing, we have this awesome paradigm model that allows a lot of the issues that were in big data to be addressed easily. You have the elasticity of cloud computing, so we can reach out there and you can dynamically change what you need. If you want to do processing, you can spin up virtual servers and spin them down when you're done. So you have these two individual camps. You have cloud computing and big data, and the intersection is really nice. But really the standards that we need for interoperability that are currently being working on now, and which NIST is helping a lot with, is going to be enabling the next step moving forward. You have the concept of, say, federated clouds, which is you have organizations that have shared concerns and they want to pour resources into the cloud. One of those resources is typically data. You might say have semiconductor industry has information on their advanced manufacturing. You might have medical organizations doing test research. You want to have these federated communities where you can pool all this data. The idea is that if you have more and more data, you have a better chance of pulling that useful nugget of information out of it. But to do that, it's going to require interoperability standards. If everybody is using their own proprietary standards, we're never going to hit that federated community. And even beyond that, you start hearing people talking now about the intercloud, the connectivity between clouds. The idea is that we want to get into a situation where we have access to the greatest amount of data so that we can start pulling out those useful nuggets. Granted, we're probably going to have a lot of noise in that data, and it's going to take a lot of resources, but cloud computing is an excellent opportunity for us to get that added value out. And one of the key things moving forward is standards, and NIST and the public working groups are working on those. Quite a few organizations have recognized that, and we've started the ball rolling on a lot of standards, and more are coming online all the time.
So that leads very nicely, Pete, into, I think, a discussion about some of the things that you're doing. A lot of discussions about, there's so much information at Department of Energy, I can only imagine. So how do you start, like you said, getting into the value of this data with big data?
Right. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. I love my job at Energy. I say that pretty much quite often these days because listening to Shawn and John speak about the infrastructure and the use cases, and maybe leading some of those efforts. I have the fortune of actually working with a lot of our national labs, our program offices, and discovering who's doing what, who's doing it well, who has some best practices that could be leveraged. And to be honest with you, when your backyard is the national labs, the innovation is ridiculous. I mean, they're doing cloud. They've been doing cloud. They've been doing IPv6 since 1999. We're still struggling here in the government in some cases to understand why do I need to do it. Pick the topic, it's being done in the labs, the innovation is happening. And I joke about being a connective tissue officer, but more so than a chief technology officer, but that's simply because I'm out there, I'm partnering with folks, and I'm understanding how, in this case, big data is being used, the challenges that we're facing in the labs, and we have some examples that I'll speak to. But from a cloud perspective, I mean, I can list, we just did a report that's been published in the national labs themselves. Forgive me, I don't have the actual link to it, but if you Google national labs and cloud computing, you're going to see a really great report on what those labs are actually doing, collectively and individually, and where we're learning from it more in the headquarters arena. So one of the things that I've been doing as of late is been reaching out to the labs. I recently held a summit at the department where I pulled in three of our national labs, and we talked about big data. What does it mean to the lab, and how are they handling it? And if you were there, if anybody was there, you probably walked out feeling like you just took a graduate course in physics to some extent. But the focus was really about extracting value. How do you take value from the information you're collecting? Now, these are folks who have supercomputers in their lab facilities who are creating more data at quintillion speeds, 10 to the 18th processes per second in some cases, and storing it. And then there's the whole issue of how are we going to analyze that? So when you think about this convergence of cloud and big data, think about the value chain or the ecosystem. Okay, the cloud is a wonderful repository now for those agencies and maybe folks who are thinking, do I really want to go there? To hear Steve earlier today when folks say, well, I don't know if I want to trust the cloud, but I trust my data center. I'm starting to think about the storage aspects. So if I can go to our national labs and talk to them, and they're telling me that, Pete, we're creating data at such a speed that when it comes to analyzing it, now we're venturing into new paradigms of how to actually do the analysis. Because it's very serial in nature. Again, I wouldn't know how Shawn and maybe John and how they're doing it. I could speak to some cases where traditionally it's you collect data, you look at it, maybe you have some raw data that you're going to fiddle around with, and then you're going to start to process it. You're going to examine it. And then you hope to maybe visualize it. Well, that takes time, right? And in the national labs, there's a phrase that they've not coined, but they use, and that's in-situation analysis. taking data to the source, or taking the source and processing to the data itself, so that you could actually, in real time, get chunks of information and make decisions, as we talk about data-driven solutions, real time, because at the speed at which it's being processed. So when you think about this paradigm shift in the convergence of cloud and big data, I think they go part and parcel together. One is your storage, you're going to, venue. If you're thinking you can store your information more, better, or more efficient, great. But that's what cloud service providers are in the business of doing. And then the analysis tools that you're looking at from again, however you define big data. I like to say big data, small data, there's analysis that has to be done. And not to be mistaken, and a little a nugget that came out of the lab community as well was this combination of the human and the machine, and how they two are necessary parts for one another. Regardless of if you're a high-performance computing arena, there's human judgment that still comes into play. When you visualize data, it brings reasoning back so that we as human beings, as the lab scientists and researchers tell me, say that you're still part of the discussion, okay? So if it's to leverage technology to store the information that we're producing at vast quantities on the social media explosion and all this information that's flying around today, there's still that element of machine learning and human judgment that goes into really deducing what am I looking to analyze. So that's sort of like just an entree into some of the things that the labs and our Department of Energy, if you will, are looking at when you bring up the topic of big data. And I want to be clear that a lot of my examples are in the realm of the scientific computing arena around big data. And that just goes to show you that I think the easy out is if I'm someone at the federal government or in the federal government or an agency saying, I'm going to tackle a big data strategy. Well, that's a daunting task. And I think it's one that we as a federal agency and by agency are going to have to do here in the near term. But maybe we'll get into the discussion of how do you actually go about building a strategy based on what it is your mission is, what's that business unit, and the governance aspect of big data, much like with cloud computing, where when you're in a federated environment like the Department of Energy is, and you have to pull in folks who are ahead of the pack, behind the pack, early adopters, late adopters, still scratching their head. In our case, you have M&O communities, contractor-run organizational entities. There's a lot that goes into building a strategy, and I think that's something over the next year agencies are going to be asked to do, should be doing, and it's going to be very complex. And that has nothing to do with the technology. The tools will be there. The cloud service providers will be just waiting for us to say, now it's time to come. But when you think about using data to make decisions and provide insight so that you can have data-driven mission solutions, if you will, that's where you have to think about the big picture of big data. And I think that's something that some agencies are maybe contemplating, but big or small, it would be good to be sharing information. I think Shawn's example of best practices in this white paper would be something we need to socialize across the government. Examples at the department, the Nimbus project, for example, at the Department of Energy, Globus Online, petabytes of data are being passed on a daily basis. It's an infrastructure as a service tool. The Magellan Initiative that just completed after 2 years, cloud computing in a mid-range computing paradigm environment, has some really wonderful lessons learned. And then we got folks out at Pacific Northwest National Lab, Bill Pike, doing wonderful analytical investigations and how he's helping in the cybersecurity community, how to visualize a lot of the data, in that realm of, bringing a picture being worth 1,000 words. So there's a lot of opportunities at the labs, and I'd be more than happy to share more stories, but please take advantage of going to energy.gov to look and search on some of these case studies to see, what the experts are doing in this discussion we're having today.
Yeah, I think you brought up a bunch of interesting topics that we can kind of continue. I was up at a thing at MIT, I don't know, a month or so ago, people sort of pontificating about the future of data analytics. We also have a new data analytics company that we started. So I was up there talking about it, and I said, perhaps it really shouldn't be called big data anymore. Perhaps it should be called fast data now, because the expectations have changed. Like you said, it's everybody presumes the cloud's here, big data's here, we have the technology, you know what I mean? Like that's sort of presumed. But once you start giving people access to it, it's like the little kid's book. If you give a mouse a cookie, does anybody have little kids? You give a mouse a cookie, then he wants to go to the movie theaters, then he wants, yeah, the book, yeah. Then the poor little mouse wants to do everything, and the poor kid's worn out. But once you start giving people access to data, they want faster data, better data, accurate data, like you said, be able to do more with it. And so I at least have seen an interesting change happening. I think you alluded to it, that there's a bunch of different people in the room now, you know, because it becomes like, what do you want to do with the data? What can you do for the organization with the data? And I think that's an interesting place for technology finally to have made its place to the business table and in a really meaningful way. So I think I wanted to get some of your thoughts on that, because I think you've seen firsthand, like I appreciate your thing. The minute you start putting data out there, you know, it's a good and a bad thing. It's always good, but, you know, transparency has its other side, and once people start seeing stuff, they want more.
Right.
So in keeping with that theme, I wanted to turn it back to you, and I don't know, just kind of get your thoughts on
Well,
that.
a couple of things. I mean, both great points on both parts. I'm just refreshing to hear good actual experience of real world experience dealing with this. Because the interesting thing is, you know, I think we're at a point now where the discussion of big data and cloud, I think it's been talked about so much. I think we're at a point now where we can understand that you can't talk big data without talking cloud, mobile, and information assurance, because they all go together, right? Because at the end of the day, it comes back to what you were just saying, the data, the information, right? And all of these other capabilities are kind of delivery mechanisms, right? When you look at the cloud is a way of accessing and data and being able to be able to deal with the workloads in a different way. Mobile, we all are pervasive in how we move around to access the data. And with that, you got all types of applications on top of it. But at the end of the day, you're really accessing the data, right? So, I mean, I think we're at that point now where we get that. And now it's about hitting pause on all the technology and coming back to reality of where we really are. Everything's about the business of the organization, the goals, the objectives, of what the organization's actually, appropriated to do, if we're talking from a federal standpoint, and then actually saying, now, how can I better achieve my goals and objectives of the organization, leveraging 21st century technology to do things in a more efficient way, right? And now you get into the space, but now you look at these capabilities differently when you look at it from a business standpoint, because you'll find yourself answering a lot of the questions that you're asking, right? Now you say, well, I have these types of information assurance types of challenges or what have you. Now you say, well, based on my portfolio and my business goals, this is what I expect, no different than it being on-prem or a hosted solution. My requirements don't change. Now, how I look at who would be the potential provider, whether it be on-prem, cloud hosted solution, hub, broker type configuration, right? In essence, at the end of the day, my requirements haven't changed, right? And now you say, I have better opportunities to deal with delivering petabytes of data, and based on the performance requirements that I have of the business, right? So it's about business first, and business drives technology. Technology enables the business to meet its goals and objectives, right? So just looking at it from that perspective, now to me it's a refreshing view of the opportunities and capabilities that we have at our disposal today. And the real cool thing is we have this view of risk, right? Whether it be, I have all this data I got to deal with, right? Now it turn that risk into opportunity. With opportunity comes innovation, right? And now you can do some really interesting things when you look at it like that. So I mean, it was kind of interesting when you start to talk about some of the unstructured data types of challenges, and it becomes interesting in our business because we deal with law enforcement, and we have to deal with unstructured data analysis from a big data perspective, meaning to be able to ingest, entity extract, develop themes based on the data to drive that into showing you where that needle in the haystack actually is. I mean, we do that in a big way, and we deliver it as a service for external agencies. But it becomes interesting when you look at how you can do that and then roll that data into in-memory computing or using Hadoop-type clusters to be able to generate quick results on the outcome. So, but again, though, the business drove that configuration where we said, oh, I mean, it was kind of funny. We said, well, we'll do these things. And then we said, once the large amounts of data came in, we actually had to look at how we solved that problem differently. So, you know, we quickly retooled our advanced analytic cloud to be able to quickly consume, index, and be able to ask questions of the data and present that to customers in a secure fashion and providing the performance that they need, because the quicker you can get the data in the format that you can ask questions of it, the quicker the analyst can actually start work. When you start to deal with cases and stuff, I mean, you can't do anything until you can ask questions of the data.
Right. I have several more questions and different ideas, but I wanted to take a quick break and see if there was somebody in the audience that had anything pressing or urgent that they wanted to, yes.
So this is directed mostly at Pete. You know, going to the cloud is more than just enterprise IT, the services you provide, right? You know, DOE is highly focused on the energy grid, and there's a national strategy to modernize. And I think maybe as early as yesterday there was
Layers of abstraction for you to begin to connect the dots to be able to effectively ask questions that can get you close. Right, because the goal, I mean, when you look at, I'm just going to flip it and say, when you look at the way we deal with it, to deal with the data quality problem and the lack of standards problem, I mean, it comes back to John. I mean, it's all about if you have all these data sources out here with no standards on them, right, or so many different standards that are only understood at the federal agency level, and you want to begin to leverage those data sets and begin to connect the dots, because one data set isn't going to answer your question, right? It's going to turn into me connecting this data set to this data set to this data set, asking questions to derive a different outcome that gives me a potential level of risk that now you have to bring the humans involved. To actually look at it and begin to look at false positives, false negatives, to now to begin to start to do link analysis and take you somewhere. And that, to me, is a challenge. And I would expect, when I look at the way that RFI was written, is I think they've learned a lot with what they've done on their own, and I think they also learned something from our working with them. And I think that's my recommendation would be have that discussion with them, because I think they're going down the right path now.
I'll just comment real quick on that. Standards is always going to be something is the nirvana, right? We'll get to the standards, but early adoption and adoption, best practices, dipping your feet in the water ultimately lead to that. I go back 10 years ago, more than that actually, when we were deploying voice over IP at the Department of Education when I worked there in 1999. I mean, who was doing it then? Not many people. And we were using proprietary protocols, and people were like, you crazy? You're going to put voice, video, and data on the same network? We got to wait for the session initiation protocol to come before you should even be thinking about that. Well, our CIO at the time, Craig Lugard, who's now at the VA, was a visionary. I mean, you know, you're either going to look at this opportunity based on the situation at hand, recognizing that standards will come, but adoption helps define those standards.
Yep.
And when you talk about data provenance, the integrity of the data, the quality of the data, garbage in, garbage out. And I think this gets back to, you know, starting fresh or clean with a data set and building quality standards in or simulations to make sure code, in the case of the national labs, they talk a lot about how they'll write simulation code to make sure that the data is in fact clean by the time it is produced or ultimately analyzed or visualized. Well, when you're dealing with what we already have, and the myriad data sets today, you know, that's an effort. That gets into data governance. There are tools and I'm sure ways, but that's that link of the human judgment, looking at information and saying, I mean, I can look at a bill, for example, that comes to my house and say, I'm not getting that service from Verizon. But unless I really look at it and examine it and say, you know, I'm talking about my triple play, there was like a, you know, line maintenance, you know, for $2.10. I'm like, what the hell is that? So I call them up, and it's like the typo. So that's bad data that I had to look at because it was captured in some sort of algorithm that produced my bill. So data provenance, data pedigrees, quality, information assurance, that's yet another angle when you think about the big picture of big data and how to develop a strategy. Mr. Van Rokel spoke about the digital strategy. this morning, and there's 4 elements in there being information-centric, customer-centric. Well, the 4th pillar there was security and privacy of data, and make sure your policies marry that. That's a loaded statement because the work behind it is significant. And this is where you can get into what is a challenge of ultimately big data. It's having the right people at the table. And I don't mean just go hire a data scientist. The researchers who are data scientists in my world say, as much as people think we're brainiacs, and I'm not quoting anybody, the greatest challenge for these folks who work in this community is that they don't necessarily always have the chance to sit down with the customer to understand what is it you want to do with the data, even if you don't know what you don't know, to have the dialogue. And that's a challenge for, I think, every agency when it comes to, now we got to go discover our data, determine if it's clean, then figure out how do we cleanse it if it's dirty, and then what are we actually trying to do with it? And one person can't do that. The CIO isn't the only one who can do that. The business units have to be involved. So if you think about, as we move into this paradigm and this shift into cloud computing as the infrastructure for our big data efforts so that we can make decisions and build tools and use data to, provide new insights so that we can be more innovative. I mean, there's a value chain. We mentioned earlier about, I wanted to throw in, when you think about the tools that are out there today, again, one question that for me really, a statement or something I read recently, which broke down the elements, or in this case it was actually quadrants and it wasn't a Gartner report, that dealt with, are you dealing with, here's a question to ask yourself, are you dealing with structured data? Are you dealing with unstructured data? Are you looking for real-time data streaming? Are you looking at batch processing, transactions? I mean, these are questions that have to be asked so you can say, okay, well, what type of tool will I need? And there are many out there. Vendors in the room here, I'm sure, have big data solutions. But if we can come up with that value chain that's consistent across the government, then the goal is and hope that maybe we all don't go off and build a big data strategy that's not consistent on some sort of standard of methodology. I think that's something we should look for, in the near term as agencies embark on that, versus being the first to be the cloud, first person in the cloud, or the first one deploying IPv6 or to be HSPD12 compliant. This is, I think, something where we are literally at a point where everyone could say, this is going to be a daunting task. Let's convene a group of folks from various disciplines, and let's approach this with some governance.
But you know what, Pete, one quick deal. I know you. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm from NIST. When standards gets mentioned, I have to jump in as well. I agree with everything that's said. If you develop a standard in a vacuum, it's never going to be successful. People aren't going to adopt it. Cloud computing is so diverse, it was apparent right from the outset for NIST is that we needed to pull in all these different viewpoints, the consumers, the providers, people who are going to be dealing with auditing, which is why we had the NIST Public Working Group. We had like 500 people participating in each individual work groups, which was fantastic, getting all these different viewpoints that really did help guide NIST in a lot of these activities. But you don't also typically just jump straight into doing a standard. Even then, at the ISO IEC International Standards Development level, quite often you have a process by which you understand the situation, you do technical reports, then you come up with guidance, all of which leads to developing a standard that, an international voluntary consensus standard that everyone will be able to adopt.
See, I lost my train. You messed it up. I mean, both of you. It was the key that I heard out of this discussion, right, was, again, business drives the technology, and that's a loaded statement, right? Because in essence, you have to understand the business requirements first, and then to do that, you have to sit down with all the key players, right, from the business owner's perspective and the people that would potentially enable the meeting of these business objectives, right? And then with that, to be able to effectively generate use cases, right? Because if you get I don't know how many people in here, raise your hands if you are actually a technology practitioner that actually builds stuff. Is anybody in here, right? So, cool thing about that is you all know that if a business owner can effectively give you a use case with expected outcomes of what you want, right? You all can build it. Right? Because I could have turned the question around to you and said, how do you help CMS with their problem based on the business use case that you can see from your vantage point. Now, the problem I could say federal has is actually being able to effectively do that, because we quickly jump to either the what's popular or what's going on at the moment in the technology that is the buzzword, and then somehow disconnect that from our business requirements. I mean, it happens all the time. It happens at the policy level. It happens at the contract level. So contracts are getting let, but no connecting those contracts to the other like contracts. So the individual federal agencies can make informed business decisions to get the most out of it, to get through a procurement process, right? I mean, if you ask me, that's systemic in federal, but I think that's something we can learn from.
I know we had one question there.
this
You've
is
been very patient, so I want to let you have
This is
it.
a great discussion, though. I mean, the devil's very much in the details. I'm curious, in tying to the digital government strategy that Mr. Van Rokel was promulgating, and it's been sort of in the news here of late, and taking into account that the data quality is a big problem with this. I'm curious about the work that you guys are doing, perhaps in your agencies or what you might see in other agencies, around publishing APIs to the data and actually making digital government strategy real. Where do you see that starting first? We've seen Census do a little something, but haven't seen other things. Curious about your thoughts.
With recovery, we provide an API to make sure that not only can citizens and I say good government watchdog groups and what have you, and the development community can actually access recovery.gov and build their own applications using our data. And it was kind of interesting. I was at a forum like this, and it was funny. With someone in the front row, they actually said, "Why don't you all provide usable APIs to the panel?" And then I actually asked the question. I said, "Well, keep me honest. Have you built an application using our API?" "Yes, I'm not talking about you." And yours worked, right? Then he gave me his name. So remember, I got on you and you all made a change, right? So from our perspective, it's kind of like once you give something to a child, you can't take it away. Once you start to go down a path of openness and standards and a way of doing business, now everything we do moving forward will always have APIs associated with it at the same level of quality that we did with the successful initiative, right? And I'm pretty sure that part is probably systemic across federal. Once you do something right, you keep doing it. I don't know if you all experience the same. Yeah.
I would suggest go to the EIA website, which EIA Energy Information Administration. We've released an API recently. They're doing some exciting things, and that's the treasure trove of energy statistics. So yeah, we're embracing it as an agency. And to be honest, it's when you think about the digital strategy coming out of the EOP, Executive Office of the President, I've been in government 23 years, and unfortunately, sometimes it's thou shall, and it's not that easy. And case in point, the BYOD toolkit that came out as a result of digital strategy, it's about 3 pages. It's got some great suggestions. It doesn't say it's a mandate. It says things you should think about, but kind of encouraging you to really examine what's in the BYOD space. That's a tough one to tackle too. You got legal issues. We're dealing with general counsel. But back to embracing open government and open data. The data.gov efforts are wonderful. The communities that have built there. I'm thinking that being a one-stop shop, go out and look at a data set and then hope that an entrepreneur or developer will do something with it, a la the challenges we've had, the energy apps for energy challenge, the apps for the environment challenges of late. So we're putting that information out there. But the onus, I agree, is really back on agencies who maintain data. And I will say that working with EIA the last couple of years, Gina Pearson are a great team. I just sat with Mr. Szyminski, the recently appointed administrator. They have embraced this movement of opening and building APIs, opening data sets, that is, putting information out there. But it's been why do I have to do that? This is going back a few years when the information's already there on our portal. Well, it's because it's in Flash and it's a PDF file and it's not something I actually, and then you have that human element of, well, wait a minute, well, what am I going to do if my information is just there for someone else to? So that's been a process, but to see EIA now really leading this innovative effort is amazing. And I think that's part of the as Steve said, it's the beginning of a rethinking of how your information is as an asset to your agency. Okay, if you think of it as the data being something that is, it's still EIA data. EIA is still the curator of the information. But to make it available so others can go, and that's what's embracing this whole open government theme that the president put in his memo in 2009. Transparency, collaborative, participatory. The vendor communities are willing to, we all know, to collaborate and help us, but we have to be willing to open the doors and say, all right, help me with these thousands of data sets that I have, or build an API. And I think that's, again, has nothing to do so much with the tool sets that are out there, but this trend towards rethinking government. And I'm a big fan of this strategy and hope that there's, part 2, which is a little more specific.
I'll throw some final thoughts on that. Certainly, APIs are a great way to get interoperability. When you have the APIs available, you basically open the door for innovation. People can go out there, access the data, and come up with new and innovative ways to make use of that data. But stepping back, you also don't want a world with thousands of different APIs if you can handle it. International voluntary consensus ones would be a preferable method. But moving forward, you also, and it was mentioned earlier today, you have the concept of a cloud broker. This role where they can actually sit there and help manage the complexity of interfacing with all these different data sources. I also see that's a particular role that will be dealing with APIs in the future.
Okay, so I think we've used up our time. Is it a very quick question? I think we have like 30 seconds.
Yes, real quick. God was able to make the earth in 6 days because he had no installed base. Government agencies are strapped with 75% of their funds being locked into legacy systems. Is not really the challenge for all these cloud adoptions, how do I transition? How do I migrate those legacy apps?
Well, I mean, that, to me, therein lies the opportunity in on-prem cloud hub / broker, and then you can put workloads out to different cloud providers while retaining your existing infrastructure and providing the information assurance you need to meet your business goals.
But that's not modernizing. I mean, you can't just rehost legacy apps and get the value that cloud offers. You really have to modernize those.
But I mean, right, but like you said, I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So in essence, with any type of migration approach, one, consolidate, then migrate, build it and they will come kind of scenario. So now when if you augment your existing infrastructure, like I said, no different than what we did. We moved our mail and collaboration from on-prem Exchange to Microsoft 365, but we did it in a way where we augmented our on-prem infrastructure, so all compliance comes back to our on-prem infrastructure. So now we can actually begin to roll different things out at a pace that makes sense without saying I have to change all of my on-prem infrastructure, right? So it enables you to broker out, and you can put workloads where it makes sense at a pace that makes sense for your business.
I'll just make a quick plug for on that transformative effort in that realm, which is it's titled Right Path. If you haven't heard or seen about it, led out of our NNSA. It's a combination of NNSA and the Department of Energy headquarters arena. It's an exciting project that looks at the blank slate of how to offer services, commodity IT, leveraging cloud, leveraging mobility. We have marketing terms like one voice, your cloud, one network, or one NNSA network. But it's pretty exciting stuff. Travis Howerton and Anil Carmel, the CTO and deputy CTO specifically, our CIO, Bob Breeze. There's been a convening of, if you will, 2 pretty significant pillars at the department looking at the future of commodity IT. And that's an example of, we are looking at, yes, there's legacy systems maybe that can't be retired, who knows, but it's really pushing the envelope. And we needed a player like an NNSA, I would argue, that really is got a force behind it at the department to embrace this. Not so much from their mission, but from an enterprise view of the Department of Energy. And when NNSA is wanting to do something, it's pretty compelling. So to team with the CIO, and Bob Rees, our CIO, has a 10-point strategic objective strategy about transformation and innovation. It speaks to a lot of these points, John. And I would encourage you to research a little bit, ask around town. But the Right Path effort is very exciting, and it really embodies a lot of what we're talking about today, including big data, and the lab communities. So I think that's an effort, to Shawn's point, of somebody's got to be an early adopter, and then during that process, the question will be asked, is this system really one that we want to stick with that might be a relational database? And you've got to ask those questions, which goes back to, what are we trying to do here? Not just say we're in the cloud, but we've optimized by going to the cloud and transformed in the process.
So I'd like to thank all the panelists. I'd like to thank Mike and SIIA for hosting this event, and thank you for your time. And we'll see a year from now where big data is, right? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.